Face to Face with the Land's End Light, a Carolina Lowcountry story. This is the true story of a very special life experience. It happened years ago in South Carolina, near the village of Beaufort, on the coast in what is referred to as Low Country. Those of you who saw The Big Chill saw scenes on the same road where I saw what I saw, actually quite near the very same spot. These include a scene looking through the venerable Tabby ruin, the Chapel of Ease on Land's End Road. My mother and father were alive back at that time and were staying on Ladies Island across the bay from Beaufort Village. They were at work on a scholarly study on the Gullah dialect. Recently married, my wife and I had come down from New York State for a short visit. We were only going to be there another few days when one day, while walking on Bay Street in Beaufort, I overheard someone outside a dime store talking about the light at Land's End. This sounded interesting, so we listened for a minute. The two people in conversation were discussing a third who had seen the light. The sighting had taken place out along Land's End Road. I took my chances at this point. I was so fascinated. I asked one of the speakers how one could find more about this light or ghost they had been discussing. Well, the person who knows more about this than anyone in the area is a man named Tecumseh, who lives near Frogmore International Airport. He can usually be found at the co-op at Frogmore, was the woman's response. We drove over to Frogmore looking for Tecumseh. Not long, and I found him. Strikingly unusual individual, part Afro-American, part Indian. He wore an arrowhead on a string on his neck and looked very youthful, though he was of middle age. I talked to Tecumseh for a while, and he lightened up, realizing that I was sincere in my interest. Finally, he agreed to go with us that evening to show us the spot where the sighting happened. We drove back to Tecumseh's late in the afternoon. We found him watering a shrub near his house. The house was the sort of sturdy antebellum structure to be seen quite often in South Carolina. Part of the front area was a barber shop, Tecumseh's occupation when not at the co-op. Tecumseh walked us around his property, and at one point I saw a strange sort of clay conical structure that was about 7 feet high by a gate. "Don't get too close to that," Tecumseh said. I was puzzled. Fire ants. They killed a calf here last week. He took a branch and held it near the colony. Immediately, a group of the ants swarmed on it, and we could hear a cracking sound as they were clamping onto the branch. I shivered at the sight of these ferocious insects. "We live with nature, but we don't always have to like her," Tecumseh laughed. The ice being broken between us, Tecumseh had lightened the mood across the board. He was suffering from a slight cold and reflected on another illness that had had a dramatic effect on him some time earlier. "I had such a high fever that I lost consciousness. It was in excess of 107 degrees. My family had gathered around, not expecting me to live. My aunt sent word, 'Our whole city is praying for you.' Finally, I began to rise above my body. I could actually look down and see myself lying there. Then my fever broke, and slowly I settled back down and found myself in my body again. Tecumseh had demonstrated in the hour or so that we visited that the ordinary and everyday was definitely not a very big part of his nature. On one more astonishing note, Tecumseh told us that 2 years previously there had been a phenomenon called a whooping boy appear in the deepest swamps nearby on one of the smaller, heavily wooded islands, Dataw. He pronounced it Datha, a Muskogean Indian name. The island was slimly inhabited at that time and was known to have been heavily populated by Native Americans for centuries. He said this strange manifestation went on for several weeks, and the shrieking, whooping sound could be heard nights, sometimes for hours, moving through the woods. He took great pleasure, I could see, in recounting folklore, and also touched on his knowledge of the original Tecumseh, who he felt a great affinity for. We were fully primed for just about any adventure that this evening might hold when we drove with Tecumseh out past the Chapel of Ease ruin of a 1740 church, which I remembered well from the part of my own childhood that I had spent on the islands over a decade earlier. We stopped by a gigantic live oak festooned with Spanish moss, which swayed lightly from the gentle breeze blowing. We began to wait. Time passed. It got darker. Several more people were also there waiting, hoping to see the light. It was probably 9 o'clock when we finally saw something. A light a long way down, perfectly straight road. Looked like someone lighting up a lantern. Slowly the light began to come up the road in our direction. "That's him," Tecumseh said. The light continued to make its way slowly up the road toward us. It swayed from side to side, continuing to resemble a lantern, but nothing behind it but a sort of luminous mist. The mist took on a more and more human shape, however. I was surprised the people in the other cars were not getting excited and asked Tecumseh about that. "Don't they see it?" I asked. "Not hardly," was his reply. I gathered he was implying that we might be more tuned in than the other folks. It certainly seemed that way. The light definitely seemed to be impelled by an intelligent consciousness. It was much brighter now, and it was getting very close. Tecumseh suggested we get out of the car to show we were not afraid. I was surprised and uneasy, but unlocked the doors and we got outside. We were standing outside the car watching the slowly moving light. I could see it a lot better, and what I was seeing was making the hair on my arms stand on end. I couldn't see my head. Tecumseh turned and smiled. "Think he likes you," he said. "Think he wants to meet you." My wife and I looked at each other in amazement, part fear, part expectation. By now the lantern light looked real and three-dimensional, but behind it was only the bright vapor, but appeared more clearly in a human form the closer it approached. I was really frightened, thinking what it might be like to see this right up to us, right in front of us. It wasn't more than 200 feet away by this time. The air was electric. It continued to edge closer. Then some of the people in the other cars saw it all at once. I heard a yell, and they started their car and drove out toward it. And then, in what might be described as a split second, the light streaked a mile back down the road. The other car stopped with a screech of brakes. We were all shaken up, but Tecumseh only commented, disgustedly that it was stupid of the other car, and now we probably wouldn't see the light again all evening. He proved right. Another visit before the trip north did not produce another sighting either, but it did tighten our sense of connection and friendship with Tecumseh. We stayed in touch with him over the following years, and he sent many curious stories from the area that inspired Joel Chandler Harris and many other compilers of folklore. I've told this story just as it happened. It is a story that bears considerable thought. As I look back on it from years later, I see it as an experience not unlike some of the best-known classic examples of miraculous occurrences. The ancient Egyptian colossi of Memnon was reported to emit sounds near dawn on a regular basis for years. In modern times, the visions of Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, whose body rests still in a perfect state of preservation in a glass-topped coffin. The visions at Fatima in 1917 that thousands of witnesses attested to. The proximity of the light to the Tabby Chapel of Ease ruin might also be considered in all of this. Most of the reports that I see of this experience at Land's End today seem to treat it rather lightly. I don't know fully how to explain it, or if it can be explained, but it is still happening, and from my perspective, it is a miracle.